Technical difficulties.
Hear me? Oh, now you can, can't you? All right. Yes, as Bryce said, we're going through a series, and I've got the happy, joyful, amazing subject talking about rejection. So, I will talk about rejection with you. It's a part. Right, who has not been rejected? Put your hand up. Ever. Good. Because if you did, I'll be talking with you and I'd be having strong words with you. We've all experienced rejection, yes, in one shape or form or another. Some may be more traumatized than others. Some may not. Here's part of my story. I thought at the outset of this morning, I shared something of my story. And I came into the world because I was a result of an affair that my dad had. And no one ever knew. And so it was back in the 60s. Yeah, I'm that old. I know I don't look it, but I am. But and then my dad decided for what he did, he didn't want anybody to know. He was very guilty about it all. And so he was going to ship me off to Hong Kong. My dad's from Hong Kong. And then, Josh, do we have that picture of that village? Oh, we do. Good man. Josh worked very hard this morning. I gave him a lot of work to do. So thank you, Josh. But this is the actual village I was going to be sent to. It's actually no bigger than Serenade Subdivision, where I live. All right, there's about 200 homes. Now, way back then, when I got the British passport to show I was about to go, the it's a British colony then, they said, no, you can't raise a child there. Because way back then, there was no running water and no electricity. So that didn't happen. And so they went into a foster home. I went from one to the next, 3 times to a foster home. Wasn't very well looked after in foster homes. I have scars to show that as well. And then what happened was my dad owned a restaurant back then in a seaside town called Hastings in the south coast of England. And he was just about to go to work. But before he went, he got talking to his wife. And they were talking about having another child. I'd like to try from another child. And then she said, while talking to my dad, said, and if it's a boy, he said, I'd like to call him Simon. And my dad, with his broken English and understanding, said, what do you know about a boy, my son, named Simon? And she said, I don't. What are you telling me? And then it obviously all came out. It says, I have a boy named Simon, somewhere in a place called Sussex, which is a region above Hastings between London. And so, all that being said, after a few years, going back and forth, at the age of 2, I was adopted into that family. Can you imagine that for a minute? So the woman who's married to my dad decided to adopt me into her family. So it's quite a story, and there's a lot more behind that. But I didn't know all that was going on, but I knew something wasn't right growing up. So I actually asked at the age of 13, and we lived in an old Victorian house, and it's a very long kitchen. And I remember at the beginning of the kitchen, my mum was preparing food. My dad was at the other side, cooking down the other side of the kitchen. And I just went up to my mum. I said, Mum, are you my real mum? I said. And she just put the knife down and said, no, I'm not your real mum. But then she said, but that's your real dad. And of course, my whole world kind of exploded when that happened. And I just left with, what do I do? Who am I? How am I going to cope with all of this? So that kind of sense of rejection just stayed with me for a very, very long time. And it affects the relationships around you. There's a reason why a third of the New Testament is all about handling and dealing with relational conflict. Because in some way or another, we're broken. All right? Wherever that may look like. So what does rejection look like for someone? It means this. Feeling rejected is the opposite of feeling accepted. This often happens at one time, in one situation, with one person that things didn't work out, and we feel we're not liked or valued or even important. All right? What does rejection do to someone? It hurts people's feelings. They feel lonely. There's jealousy, guilt, shame, social anxiety, embarrassment, sadness, and anger. That causes a person to lack self-confidence, low self-esteem, inferiority complexes, and insecurities of all sorts. And here's a big one. Why is rejection so deeply affects us? And why is it so hard to get healing from it? Primarily because it hurts emotionally in our brain. So if we cut ourselves physically, that kind of heals itself up quite quickly. But if we don't deal with and resolve with our emotions, then they actually remain painful. And so you're waiting for that next sting, that next hurt from somebody, that next part of pain, and it just comes all flooding back again. We want to grow in relationships, but things keep going wrong and they keep messing up. Here's the double bind of that. If I step out and try and make deeper friendships or new friends with someone, then I run the risk of getting hurt. But if I don't, I remain in a place of isolation and that horrible feeling of loneliness. So, going to look at this subject, and I'm actually going to go to the Old Testament, the tale of two kings, King Saul and King David. You may be familiar with those characters, but I want to just break down 5 symptoms, 5 signs of rejection from King Saul and from David, how he dealt with rejection himself. All right, so let me look at King Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel because Israelites decided to reject God as their king. They wanted a king like all the other nations around them. And Saul, sadly, tragically, died a lonely man. He even called the prophet Samuel to come up from the dead to help him. The reality is he committed suicide. It was very tragic. Yet, if we look at the very beginning of Saul's reign, God met him powerfully. He was anointed clearly in 1 Samuel 10. God clearly anointed Saul as king over his people. God had changed his heart. And also the Spirit of God came on him in power. So he clearly met God, a clear conversion, and a bright future. But if you read in between the pages and the inner life of Saul, you'll see that he never really had close friendships with anyone. So I just want to look at some of these barriers of why that happened. All right, so the first thing we see in Saul is this: self-sufficient. He wanted to do things on his own. He did not need the help of others. So there was a time when kings, before they go out to war, there's supposed to be burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, that kind of thing. So Samuel the prophet and priest, he was the one that's supposed to do that. But he didn't do that. He didn't wait for Samuel. Saul did it himself. And so we see this. Samuel said, "What have you done?" And Saul said, "When I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered burnt offerings." And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, and which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom will not continue." He took matters in his own hands. He tried to manage without involving God, without involving other people. If you have a real issue of rejection, one of the symptoms of that is this: you want to try and change, or you want to try and control people. And that's what he was trying to do. He didn't come, now I've got to do something, quick, out of fear. Right at the very beginning of the Bible, when Satan promised Eve, "You can be like God." Oh, great. I don't need God. I can be like God. The very sin at the very beginning of trying to do things without God. It's surprising how subtle strongholds of individualism is. You do you and I do me. For some people, the thought of relying on someone scares people. No, I can't do that. The very reason is they might let me down. They may fail me. You know what? They will. Sorry, people will fail you. But then if you're hurt, then there's something that's not healed. And here we see Saul says, I don't want this to be an issue. I've got to deal with it. I'm going to get hurt. I'll do it. So that's one thing. Jesus said this, I am the vine and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he that bears much fruit, apart from me, you can do nothing. Question is this, do we really let God into our lives, into the very heart of our lives? Is there any part in our lives that we don't? Only you could answer that. How vulnerable are we are to friends? If you want to get deeper friendships, you have to be more vulnerable to get there with that. All right, here's another one. Self-pity. If you want to know what a sign of rejection looks like, it's self-pity. Here comes the verses. And Saul said to his servants who stood about him, Hear, O people of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give every one of you the fields and the vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me? No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you are sorry for me. Can you hear him? None of you are sorry for me. Why aren't you? This is who discloses me that my son has stirred up my servant against me. Do you hear what he's saying? You don't care about me. You don't love me anymore. No one cares about me. It's not fair. Why do you hate me? All those things. You just see this guy. He's anointed by God. God met him clearly. But the character of the man was not fit for the job. And you just see this. Self-pity is fed by suspicion. Do you know that? Saul thinks and suspects that his men are against him. Well, no, they're not. They just want to be loved and led by a strong leader. Saul got it wrong. His perspective was wrong. Suspicion kills friendships because they forever questioning their motives, words, and actions. And Saul kept doing it throughout this whole reign. What do you mean by that? Why wasn't I invited? They're talking about me again. Well, no, I'm not. It's funny how the devil plays havoc in people's minds, isn't it? Well, that happens. Another one. Looking for the approval of others. Saul struggled with this. Approval seeking. Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned and I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me, that I may bow before the Lord. And Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. But then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me, please. Honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me, that I may bow before the Lord your God. Can you see the subtleness with Saul? Saul was more worried what people thought of him than God's response or what's going to happen to him and his reign. He made himself him. It's all about me. Please, me. It's still me involved in this. He even made a statue for himself, a monument in his name. He wanted to be known as the man. It's me. Now, it's interesting. Both King Saul and King David, in their reigns, it was just fighting all the time. They were fighting all the enemies around them to establish a nation. And it's interesting because it says of King Saul, when he saw strong men or any valiant men, he says he attached them to himself. But with David's army, it was quite different. He says all of Israel and Judah loved David. And people came and gathered to him. And they said, "We are yours, O David." Can you see the subtle difference? I want people to be with me. Just be with me. Make me feel good. Make me look good. I need to keep up my status, my appearance in all of this. I want to make sure that I still look good, even though I've sinned. But it's like, come on, Samuel, help me out here. Keep that statue open. Don't bring it down yet. All right? It's very, very subtle. The whole thing of getting to know people. Are you talking about your achievements, your successes? Do you behave differently when you know you're being watched? I'm sure Saul was in his character. Another one is this, comparing. Oh, I love this one. Comparing. When the men came back from battle, the women were out on the streets celebrating. And they said this, as they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry, and this reframed displeased him greatly. Not just a little bit, greatly. Just get the strong emotion behind this. It displeased him greatly. They have credited David in tens of thousands, he thought. But me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Other translations say a jealous eye on David. Comparing kills. The relationship between David and Saul began to break down because Saul couldn't cope with David's success. It says in the Bible, David was a better man than Saul. It's hard to take, isn't it? Do you know what? There'll always be better things and better people than you and me in the world's eyes. There'll be bigger and better cars, bigger and better houses, bigger and better looking, and better dress, better athletes, better cups, drink cups. It used to be Yeti, didn't it? What is it now? Stanley cups. Oh, here we go. What's next? There's always bigger and better. It's all on social media. But it's amazing how subtle comparing can be, which leads to jealousy. Proverbs 27:4 says this, wrath is cruel and anger is overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy? That was it. It was the game over for Saul at that point. He couldn't return. He couldn't return after the jealousy. He's after my kingdom, my power, my position, my status, my everything. And he just basically lost the plot from there on. Self-sufficient, self-pity, approval-seeking, comparing. The last one is this, is fear. It's very obvious, but I put it as the last one because the root of all these signs of rejection is because of fear. He was appointed and anointed as king, but he was a very fearful man. His whole life was dominated by fear. He was fearful of his army. He was fearful of his enemies. Who should have fought Goliath, do you think? It says actually about him, when he saw him, he was terrified and lost all hope. This is our king. And what you see is that he was fearful of Goliath himself, the very one he should have been fighting. Fear can dominate our lives. And there's a little sign, if you know that you are fearful from building deep relationships, it's when you ask the what-if questions to yourself. What if I get it wrong? Oh, what if they really don't like me? What if they get to know the real me? What if I just have a disagreement and I argue? All those kind of things. That's questions of fear. All right, now, if we're honest, we've all experienced these emotions. Would you agree? No, all of you, would you agree? Yes, because I don't want you to lie to me, because I too, me too, I deeply experience all of these things. It's when it's so deeply rooted in us that it stops us being fruitful and growing in deep relationships with God, who loves us unconditionally, and with others as well. All right, let's look to David. David's response. 4 ways of dealing with rejection. So let's get some of David's background. Poor David, he had a difficult time too. So Saul was gone. Samuel's out with the flask of oil. Says, I'm going to anoint a king. He's going to come from the family of Jesse. Goes to Jesse's house. You know the story. 7 sons went by. 7 of them. And Samuel says, well, there's none of them. Have you got any more left? Anybody else around here? And Jesse said, oh, let me just think for a minute. Yeah, there's a youngest, but he's out there on the fields looking after a couple of sheep. He says, but I didn't even think about him. And Samuel says, well, I'm not going to sit down until you get him. He's rejected by his dad. And then there's another time when David's basically bringing lunch to his brothers out on the battlefield towards the Philistines. And he comes up to them, says, I've got your lunch. And his oldest brother says to him, what are you doing? He said, where have you left those sheep? He said, you've come here to watch the battle, haven't you? And he says, you need to go back. Come on, get out of the way. You're in my way. And then he says, now what have I done? It's like he can't do anything right all his life. So he's rejected by his family. Basically, you're just a nobody. Just put to one side. So he knows what it is to be rejected. And of course, we know that he was hated by mad King Saul with that infamous spear in his hand to try and pin him to the wall. And we know all the sad events that happened to David. He committed adultery and murder, and what a messed up, dysfunctional family he had. And yet, which just amazes me, the story of David always amazes me, and yet, he's reconciled back to God. He's restored as king of Israel and Judah. And it is said in the New Testament, David, who fulfilled the purpose of God in his generation. Wouldn't that be good to put in your gravestone? Scott, who fulfilled the purpose of God in his generation. Let's look how he dealt with rejection. The first thing is this. He remembers the stories of fighting the lions and the bears. So he goes against Goliath. Saul looks at him. He says, you're a wimp. He says, you're only a youth. This guy's been fighting since he was young, Goliath. He says, what are you doing? He says, no. He says, your servant has struck down both the lions and the bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. He despised him, but David remembers the smaller battles when he was entrusted for caring for a few sheep, that when a lion and a bear came along, he was able to fight it off and fend for the sheep. We are in a battle. It was never going to be, if you're following Jesus, you all know, it's not a walk in a park on a sunny day for the rest of your life. We're in a real battle. And we need to remind ourselves the battles of the past, that where we found freedom, and that helps us keep being free from being bound up again in the place of rejection. I'll give you some examples of mine. When I first became a believer at the age of 19, the first battle I had to face was forgiving my dad. And that's another story, but I forgave him. And it took a lot to do. All my life, people have been telling me that I'm stupid. And so I had to fight the battle of not believing that lie. I mean, really not believing that lie. Not just my mind over matter. Not just trying to think, oh, I feel good today, therefore I don't feel stupid. That's the small battles. And we've all got stories of choosing not to believe that certain lie, or not to believe that certain bad company, or not to do this, that, or the other, whatever it may be. Paul wrote this. He says, Paul wrote words like this: be alert, forget what lies behind, press on towards the goal, make every effort, stand firm then, do not submit again to yoke of slavery, be on your guard. It's warlike, isn't it? It's not like, oh, let's see how I get on today. It's like having that sense of intentionality. David said this, I remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I remember the wonders of old. I will ponder all your works and meditate on your mighty deeds. We all need to remember the mighty deeds and that he's been fighting for you, and you have won battles in the past that we should remember as we take them today in the present. We need to remember because we tend to forget. But really, the older you are, the more you tend to forget these days. But I find journaling is a great way to remember what God's done. Encourage to journal. She helped me to understand how to express as well. My tears have been my food day and night. While they say to me all day long, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul. My God, why are you forsaking me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. And there's so much more and more of that. He's really able to express his feelings. You know, I had to learn this. This was not natural for me, particularly being half Chinese and half British. It's just like, you know, Chinese is like honor and respect, and the British is a stiff upper lip. You said, oh, no, you don't show any emotion around here. You know, that kind of thing. It took me a lot of courage and change to learn how to express myself. It wasn't natural. Pride stops us from expressing how we really are. And with David, by the way he was expressing himself, I looked at every single psalm this week, and at every psalm that he wrote and expressed how he really felt, every single one always talked about hope in God. He didn't finish with self-pity. He actually finished with, but I will wait upon you, Lord. I will trust in your mighty power. I know, Lord, you will not forget me. And I think that stops you from expressing emotion, but not just living there, but thinking, where does my hope come from? Where do we put our confidence in? Peter Scazzero says this, unprocessed emotions don't die. So true. You've got to process them. You've got to express how you really feel, particularly the painful ones, because healing comes that way. All right, number one. I'll put here, who's your Jonathan? I don't mean Jonathan Emmons. We know who Jonathan Emmons is. I mean, who's your Jonathan with David? David's best friend was Jonathan. He was a close friend. Only became friends and a real close relationship because David did something bold and went into battle. Do you know how to make shallow friendships into deeper ones? By going into battle and winning a few victories. It's magnetic. People are drawn to people who do things boldly. A classic book called Making of the Man of God, Alan Redpath wrote this. He says this, as Jonathan saw David come back from battle with the head of Goliath in his hand, he loved him as one brave soldier might love another. He said, oh, look at that man. Look what he just did. That despised shepherd boy, what he did. He says he gave him his robe. It's even all his armor, even his sword, his bow, and his belt. The most precious weapons. The weapons of status. He's almost saying like, I know I'm a prince, but I'm giving it to you. I know I'm a ranked soldier, but I'm giving it to you. Jonathan saw, wow, I can follow you. I want to be your friend. He encouraged him. He protected him from the cruelty of Saul. I don't know if you know me, I love watching war movies. And there's one of the Band of Brothers. Everybody heard of that one? And at the very end of the season, there was a German commander who surrendered to the Allies. And he said this. He said, men, it's been a long war. It's been a tough one. He says, you fought bravely, proudly for your country. You're a special group. You found in one another a bond that only exists in combat amongst brothers. You shared foxholes. We've held other in dire moments. You've seen death and suffered together. I'm proud to serve with each and every one of you. That's what happens when you're in combat. That's what happens when you battle together. I tell you something, I don't have much in common with any of you guys. I'm from the other side of the pond. And I mean, half the people don't understand what I'm saying, which I get that as well. But I remember going through a drive-through. My kids always dreaded me going through a drive-through, getting Dunkin' Donuts. So, Dad, what are you going to say? Tell me what you're going to say before you say it. Okay, I'm going to say this. No, Dad, don't say that. But we don't have much in common, really. Bryce and Aaron, we're the eldest church. We don't have much in common. I mean, maybe a little bit of American football, which is always difficult. Because I asked the other day, I said, do you like American football? He says, no. He says, why? He says, there's too many rules. Says, that's exactly why it's difficult to understand. But I want you to realize, you do know the most played sport in the world is soccer. And the second one is cricket. All right? Just let you know, there is another world out there. I just want to let you know that. We don't have things in common. But the reality is, we're friends together because we're on mission together. Okay? Well, I mean, look at you. You're all different. I think, how on earth do we get together? This is God's wisdom of how we do this together, because the common thing, I have the same goals and visions and values and being on mission together. The key thing is this, taking initiative to go into battle, to keep battling for what that may look like, and I promise you, you'll attract other soldiers to the mission. They'll want to do what you're doing. Not just to join hands, but to link arms in war, or even be one in heart and soul. Next month, Ali and I are celebrating 35 years of marriage. Yes. Ali's done a great job looking after me and done well. We've always determined that at the beginning of our marriage, we've always said we're on a mission, whatever that may look like. And she has done great being a good friend to one another, but to myself, obviously. She tells me and strengthens and encourages me. She often says the dumb things that I do and say and try and protect me and keep me out of trouble as well. But that's a good friend. I would encourage you, initiate something bold to do and see people will gather around you to do that. The last thing I want to bring is this. How do we keep from the bondage of rejection is this: worship and thankfulness. Worship, I know it's easy, but it's the doing of it. David was a lifelong worshiper. From a shepherd boy, being in the presence of King Saul, in the house of the Lord, when his first child died, he worshipped the Lord there. When he brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, he worshipped there. Very often, when he was delivered from his enemies, he went into the temple and worshipped there. The whole thing about David's life, he was a worshiper. Actually, his very last words was this, before he died, in Samuel 2, verse 23 and 1. These are David's last words. The voice of the son of Jesse, the voice of the man God took to the top, whom God of Jacob made king, and Israel's most popular singer. He could have been called a lot of things, great things, but he just wanted to be known as the son of Jesse, and he also just wanted to be known as Israel's singer of songs. I'm a worshiper. Isn't it incredible, his heart? Can you see his heart in that? He kept himself in the love of God. The Bible talks about keeping ourselves in the love of God. Terry Virgo, the founder of New Frontiers, or the family of churches that we're a part of here in the States as well, he was interviewed once, and he was asked, he said, what keeps you going, Terry? He says, what keeps you going doing the ministry? Why are you motivated? And even in his mid-80s, he's still preaching and teaching and around the world. And he just said this, he says, I keep myself in the love of God. I thought, wow, wonderful. David kept himself in the love of God. Just to finish with this text here. In 1 John 14:15, it says, God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. By this is love perfected with us, so that you may have confidence for the day of judgment. Because as he is also, he is in this world. And there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment. But whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love because he first loved us. How do we get rid of fear, rejection? It's the love of God. Let's have the band back up, please. Just as I was going to finish, I just want to bring you and imagine the picture of when that sinful woman came to the Pharisee's house. Do you remember that story? And she came there, and she was described as a sinner, came into the house, and she started crying. And with her tears, wet Jesus' feet. And then with her hair, she dried them. And then she poured out this perfume, very expensive perfume, she poured out on his feet. And she kissed Jesus' feet, not just for a moment, but all evening. This woman knew what it was to be forgiven. She loved much, but she was forgiven much. And because of that, she didn't care. I mean, she was threatened to be stoned by the Pharisees. She didn't care. She didn't care what people thought of her. She didn't need any other's approval. She didn't need to impress anyone. She just knew Christ's love and forgiveness. And her heart brimmed over with thankfulness to Jesus for his love and mercy. That is a good act of worship, of what it is to overcome the fear of rejection. Let's just stand, shall we? If there's one thing I would like you to take away, is this: the answer to building deeper friendships with one another, the answer to the fear of rejection, is to trust that God loves you unconditionally. Easy to say, I know. Is to trust. The key word is trust. So my question to you, with courage and humility, is this: do you find it difficult to trust people? Do you find it difficult to trust an individual? Is there an individual that you may know is stopping you build deeper friendships with one another? I believe God wants to free you this morning. And he wants to pour out his love by his Holy Spirit to you as well. He wants to set you free from that. And maybe for some of us, it's the time for you to trust Jesus for the first time. I've got to trust people. And if that is you, what I'd love you to do is to come out to the front, and we want to pray for you. It takes courage, I know. But if you know in your heart, in your deep heart, I've got this wound, and that stops me from building friendships, then I'd love you to come forward. And there'll be a prayer team here on my right. You'll come along, and we're just going to have a time of worship. And if that's you, you need to trust again, and come out, and people will be here to pray for you. So let's sing this song, and let's worship our God.